today it's almost indistinguishable between products and services. There are definitions of what a service, a pure service is, and what a pure product is. You'll see them later on. In any respect, nearly all products have some element of service attached to it, even if it's only a simple installation through to maintenance and warranties and all this sort of stuff. So there are service elements, and these also affect customer and affect the quality and the quality understanding from a customer. So when we look at this, when we look at service quality, there's the differences between the customer's expectations of service and the perceived service. Okay. Now, I've so many times I've gone on record to rant, complain, give out, about perception. It's probably one of the dreaded words in the English language, certainly from my perspective anyway, because perception is individual. Everyone has their own understanding of quality and have their own perceptions, and try bottle that is a nightmare. That's why when I talked previously about the likes of grounded theory and all these research methodologies and so on, which you may or may not come across in time, why we have to try in some way group things to get an understanding. And that's really what happens in terms of the quality, in terms of perceptions of quality, for instance, and by way of feedback through customer surveys through marketing department or marketing function and so on. So we try to elicit these perceptions and try to categorize them, and then try and make sense of why these different perceptions exist between male, female, old, young, ethnicity, and so on and so on. We try to categorize and make sense. So we then find, that this particular group, which is slightly larger than the other groups, they have this understanding of quality. Therefore, we better give them what their perception of it is. But this is where the problem arises. So expectations are greater than performance. And always is the case. We in terms of customers or as individuals, we expect more than, and we settle for something that's because we have a perception, we think how it should behave. And that hence customers, and when it doesn't live up to our absolute expectations or doesn't exceed expectations, we become dissatisfied. And that's a dangerous territory for any company to be in, because that level of dissatisfaction can be measurable, but can have some severe impacts on growth, revenue, and so on, obviously. So this is why understanding at least these service gaps, we can do something about them. Or this is the overview of the service quality model. And as you can see, now it depends on where you look up, where you research the ServQual model. Some places will only show 5 gaps. This is a little bit more comprehensive, showing 7 gaps. In the organization, but quite simply, we'll be going through each one of these. So you have the divide between the company and the customer, okay, and perceived service, expected levels of service, and up here are these are the critical ones that we try to establish some benchmarks or get some insights into by way of surveys, feedbacks, questionnaires, call them what you will, any way of finding out, and listening to word of mouth communication. Despite all our technologies, social media platforms and so on and so forth, fundamentally, this still accounts for almost 80% of marketing in terms of people talking about your product or your services. It's the most communicated source, word of mouth. So whether you're physically meeting somebody or talking to them on your social networks and so on and so forth, it still accounts for a phenomenal amount of information spread on, and often this is predicated by past experiences, and usually people have their own opinions, which forms their perceptions and so on. And of course, then we feed all these into what we generally get as an understanding of some kind of expected service level. Now we'll go down through these individually, but fundamentally, this is where excuse me, this is where it all begins for, and where companies have the biggest mismatch between services and what they're producing. You remember me mentioning before back in if you look at the chronological evolution of supply chain, 50s, 60s, 70s, build stuff, pushed everything out, and now we're in a pull situation. This is particularly the reason why, because we're listening more and more precisely to what customers are actually asking us to deliver. And that's why we have this pull. And of course, the other more important points, the cost of production, the cost, the complete cost along the supply chain, to be able to reduce overall cost to keep our products profitable, while at the same time giving the high expectations of customers in terms of quality. So moving down, gap one is obviously the difference between management perceptions of what customers expect and what the customers really do expect. And you'll see this happening inside, even within the organization. So the management and senior management in organizations believe they understand what the customers are. But in reality, what they're actually doing is reading information second and third hand. They're reading reports from customers, or from marketing, for example, or some talk in the corridor, generally speaking, formally through reports and looking through some kind of data to form an opinion, to get an understanding of what they think customers are feeling. Again, some organizations are very clever in this approach. Whenever they hire people, they put them working directly through operations, through all their functions, before they take up their formal role, whether it's a vice president or a factory operative. It doesn't matter. Some companies, to name one, Toyota, Kawasaki, do the same thing. And fundamentally, they tend to be Eastern-based type companies that go through that. Although that said, I have seen it in 1 or 2 UK companies, again, spending 3 months, 6 months, whatever.
Lidl and Aldi do that.
Even closer to our doorstep, exactly. But it makes perfect sense. And I think B&Q also do it as elements of it in part of their retail management processes. In any case, it's intrinsic, so that people get to know and understand the products, the issues that are facing. Back in my day, I spent time down in customer care as a part of an exercise a week, just to get to understand what the poor guys were having, the abuse and so on and so forth that they were getting from customers about this not working, that not working, and so on and so forth, just to get an insight, and then go off and find solutions to say, can we make improvements here and there and so on. That's by way of how I say, reducing the gap. What I'm talking about is ways of reducing these gaps, even though we know they exist. Here's my controller. In the second gap, the difference between management perception, service quality and specifications, and the standards gap as a result of inadequate commitment to service quality. So a perception of unfeasibility, inadequate task standardization, and the absence of goal setting. So this is where we're really digging into the internal workings inside the organization as to, what are these standards? What do we have to be compliant to? Are these standards reflective of what the customers are, or are they just a bare minimum, or are they above what customers' expectations are? So getting to grips with the levels of standards, the different impacting agencies that can affect your operations, your supply chain, whatever function you're working in. So standardization and the absence of goal setting. So when we don't set goals to, you hear these, as I say, throwaway comments, exceed customers' expectations, fluffy stuff, as I say, fadism and all that. So, stick a couple of concepts, 2 words together, and you come up with some kind of concept. It's not that straightforward. There has to be thought into. That's why I'm such an advocate of proper processes and setting correct goals to be able to achieve these, and having the processes to support it. And that's what this kind of comes down to as well, knowing what the standards are, what do we need to put in place. In another field of management, you're looking at leadership and understanding how you can pave the way, create the environment for people to be able to achieve goals based on having the right processes in place. The gap 3, the difference between service quality specifications and actual service delivery. So are standards consistently met? Now, these are not just standards about compliance, IEEE standards or ISO standards and all that stuff. That stuff is basic. Standards might be, how quickly is the service delivered, the professionalism of a particular service, the support mechanisms, it could be a simple thing like your frequently asked questions. those kind of standards, are you consistently meeting, turning around issues? If customers have issues with your product or service, how quickly are you responding to those? Are you doing it consistently? So as a result of role ambiguity and conflict, poor employee job fit and poor technology job fit, blah, 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 inappropriate supervisory control systems, lack of perceived control, and so all of the above, and the lack of teamwork and so on. One of the ways, for example, B&Q get around this lack of teamwork, they have their huddles in the mornings, where they brief each other of relocated products and update their updated handheld devices. So if you have a customer who has a query about a particular product, can't find it, they'll almost walk you down by the hand. Yeah, that's a long way from years and years ago. The guy went off and hid in the stores and said, is Mark on yet? Is it safe to come back out? From those levels to total proactivity, but because they put the processes in place and they've taken the time out. And you're walking in onto the shop and you can see these huddles around in the stores themselves. That's how they're getting around some of these issues that are being addressed. Excuse me. And the fourth one here, difference between service delivery and what is communicated externally. So are promises made consistently fulfilled as a result of inadequate horizontal communication and propensity to overpromise? And Dell would be a classic example there in this. Why would they say we'll have your product when you click the buy button and commit to the order, you get an email back or a notification, your product will be with you within 10 working days, for argument's sake. That's the outer level. 99% of the time, that's the outer limit of when it'll be worked. So it set your expectation there and then. More often than not, it was coming in maybe 8 days, 7 days, not much below that. You're not going to get it the following day, because word of mouth saying, geez, I ordered and I got it within 24 hours. That sets an expectation. So they'll work it within a tolerance level. Only once did Dell fail in, that I'm aware of, that Dell failed in not complying with their promises or not being able to fulfill the delivery promise. And that was the very first of these little notebooks that came out. There were 200-300 euros or some small little thing, about half the size of your laptop and so on. Nice, convenient little piece of equipment. They underestimated the demand. And HP actually nearly beat them to the market in terms of getting the quantities out there to meet customer demands. And Toshiba were also out there at the same time. That was one of the few occasions where, for general purpose machines, Dell kind of misgauged the demand. So they were sending out emails to try and manage customers' expectations for about 2 weeks beyond the delivery dates. But in any case, this is the kind of information we're talking about, dealing over and back.
Just that on that example, that could result in, I suppose, a delighted customer. It is a gap, right? I may say I'll get it to you within 10 days, but I'll get it to you in 4. So yes, I'm missing my published SLAs, but I'm actually delighting the customer at the same time.
You could argue that, but the point I was making there, Colin, is that if I get online and say, hey, look, I got it in 4 days, then it could create an expectation from other customers. Well, he got it within 4 days. Can I get it in 4 days, and so on? So it can put pressure on the system. The reason why I'm saying is that they work in those tolerance levels. It's because they have the data, they collect it, they know what they can commit to, they know what they can actually confidently deliver to customers in terms of whether it's 7 days or maximum 10 days. And that's why they give themselves that, as I call it, the Scotty effect. Your man out of Star Trek, literally the engineer, he always overestimates, and then he's considered to be a genius or a god or whatever, because he comes in ahead of time. And even in one movie, he's asked, why do you do that? Because I'd like to let him think that I'm anyway. But that's the whole point. But now at least we're getting more and more data that we can be almost precise down to the hour, the minute. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but at least within a couple of hours of when we can actually deliver to a customer. The supply chains have become that tight, and because this is a contributor to competitive advantage, which we'll be coming on to in the second half. tonight. So gap 6, the discrepancy between the customer expectations and employees' perceptions. So as a result, the differences in the understandings of consumer expectations by the frontline service providers themselves. And that can be very simple, not listening to the customer, or the customer isn't communicating clearly enough. So having, if necessary, training staff to be able to ask the right questions. Now, unfortunately, a lot of situations where, if you're using call centers and so on, so they're following a script. So there's no room for lateral thinking, follow the script or nothing at all kind of thing. And if it doesn't fall into this, it's hanging there a lot of the time. However, again, and it's almost like trying to be a good psychologist with your consumer, trying to get inside their heads to understand. Bearing in mind that depending on the type of service that you're offering, can you afford to have people engaged on a one-to-one basis for hours, half an hour, quarter of an hour? What are the time slots that you have for a person to be able to get as much information about the customer or from the customer to be able to give them the level of service that they expect or perceived they want in the first place? So it can be, again, having the right frontline staff. Again, your choice of people that are dealing with customers, that becomes critical, because not everyone is suited to dealing with customers. Not everyone can sell. Selling stuff to customers is one of the, I rate it as a very, very difficult task. Some people might say, well, that's easy, because it might come somewhat naturally to them. And all joking aside, the Arthur Daly's second-hand car salesman, they're worth their weight in gold because they can size up customers. They can really get their levels of communication and non-verbal communication are superb, to say the least, because they pick up on signals and so on, and they know whether that person is genuine or not, whether they should waste time or devote more time to making a sale and so on. So anyway, without going on. So in gap 7, discrepancy between employees' perception and management perceptions as a result of differences in the understandings of the customer expectations between the managers and the service providers themselves. So that can come down to things like the actual goal setting and not having proper discussions. It could be down to your appraisal situation, or it could be down to your 360 performance, whatever way you set your goals. That it's a two-way channel. It's a two-way street. In other words, this is what I'm doing, and these are the goals I agree with my manager, and the manager needs to understand what I'm doing at more detailed level. That's why, for example, Jack Welch talks about HR or HR functions, and I mentioned this before, why HR function is so important, to be able to listen to people and to be able to support your organization, and spending more time in the people management side of things. Just being a manager of the warehouse, or being a manager in part of operations, so on and so forth, requires you to have a lot more people interaction, a lot more people understanding and so on, to be able to set the goals and know where their limitations, people's limitations are or not. But fundamentally, this is what it comes down to in terms of perception by management. So it's also an onus of responsibility for employees to be able to tell management, this is really what's going on here. Your understanding is not quite the same as our understanding. Two different realities, call it what you will. But oftentimes it becomes an issue of trying to explain and educate back up to the manager to say, now these are the percent. And again, this comes down to communication, how effectively as an employee you can communicate the various issues, the nuances, and so on of a particular product or service, such that the manager or whomever you're dealing with has a better understanding. And again, training fits into place there. So just in summary, the reasons for the gaps: not knowing what customers expect, the wrong service quality standards, service performance gap itself, promises to do when promises do not match the actual delivery, That could be time, quality, speed, flexibility, and so on. I'm purposefully changing my style here because they were critical points I just made. Fortunately, I will be coming back to them again later on. But in any case, we're talking about promises or expectations to deliver. Difference between customers' perception and expectations. That's probably a difficult one to try and get to understand, as I said, because of that one bloody word in there, perception, trying to group them and get a collective feel for the different sets of perceptions based on the different customer types and so on. Then discrepancy between customer expectations and implied perceptions, and then finally the discrepancy between implied perceptions and management. So these are the 7 gaps. A lot to contend with in any organization, and that's why it becomes important to have the right goals and get really inside the heads of your customers. Customer segmentation, not necessarily as a pure marketing function, but also for your supply chain. And I mentioned this previously, you need to be able to segment your customers as to what under whatever category, the high spenders, the low spenders, the frequency spenders, the geographic based segmentation, such that you can deliver your products in a highly flexible, responsive, dependable manner, such that you can get repeat business and so on and so on. So again, every company owner wants to get loyal customers, which add to repeating purchases, and of course, increasing their maximum revenue. Not of course, increasing their maximum revenue. But to get there, they need to know all about the 5 service quality dimensions. And many actually think that service is just a little part of the marketing mix. It's not. It's fundamentally the extended marketing mix. Have just a thumbs up or thumbs down. Have you done marketing? Yeah. Okay. Say 1 or 2 heads nodding. Thanks. So you understand this, the whole point about the 7 Ps, the extended people, physical evidence, and what's the other one? Process. So because products have service elements in them, and service elements themselves have some kind of a product, or might use some products as part of their service, even though they're not intrinsic to the service itself. Visa is a service, but you have a physical card. Okay. So each of the 5 service quality dimensions makes an extra addition to the level of quality of service which the company offers their customers. So it also makes the service far more unique and satisfying. So how you even package all of this service element to each group of customers or individual customers and so can have a serious positive impact, which generates more revenue as such. So effort into that side of things. So it's again, it takes it out of the perceived marketing functionality in an organization. In other words, it takes when we talk about customers, immediately people can jump to the assumption that that's a marketing function. Absolutely not. Equally as much of it is within the supply chain domain itself, because you're actually delivering the product, for example, and taking back reverse logistics, taking back products, putting out replacements, putting maintenance processes in place, and so on and so forth. So that's tangential to the main marketing function of going out to find consumers and generating new markets and identifying demand and so on and so forth. You have all this other stuff which holds on to customers because it's repeatable. That's the whole point. So the service quality, tangibles, reliability, responsiveness, assurance, and empathy. And just briefly go down. So the appearance of physical facilities, equipment, personnel, and communications material itself. All of these things are sending signals and messages. So what you physically see in a product, the instructions, the way a manual is laid out, the color scheme, all of this stuff, the packaging are anchors for people's qualities perception. These are the tangibles. These are the physical evidence that we talk about in the extended marketing mix. But they're extremely important. How well you heard me mention before Eddie Stover's policy of having their lorries constantly clean, no matter what time of the year it is. The guys went in, spent money cleaning up the lorries. It created a perception the lorries were always immaculate. And it creates this perception that they are caring, they want to have, they take pride in what they're doing, in their own equipment and so on and so forth. Therefore, their service delivery and so on and so forth must be as good as the perception we have of their physical assets, so to speak. And as I say, a clean desk is a sign of a sick mind. Yeah, well, that's totally untrue. It just shows organization and structure and form, and that's important to people. It raises levels of confidence. So ability to perform the promised service dependably and accurately. So doing precisely what you say. So reliability is extremely important. And I think I mentioned to you in the early days of a local plumber above up in Glasson in outside Athlone would only deal with customers within a 50 kilometer radius, because he could get to them. He was dependable. He would be there within an hour and a half from one job to the next. That's service quality. Customers were ringing him from all over the country with problems because he had his particular specialization. I said, I can't get to you. I would be doing you an injustice, turning down money and turning down customers because of that one issue, reliability. I can only get you, and same for my team can only get you. That takes bottle. It just shows that greed doesn't work. Okay, and so reliability, that you can competently and confidently deliver a service accurately and dependably. And again, responsiveness, willingness to help customers and provide prompt service kind of folds into this reliability above up there. They pretty much go hand in hand. Assurance, knowledge and courtesy of employees and their ability to inspire trust and confidence. That's the people element of the extended marketing mix. Having the right people that have the right skills, that understand the product and service, to be able to talk with confidence to customers. That's extremely critical. Again, who you appoint into those positions, and more importantly, the type of training you provide for people. Because if you're going into you go into a dentist and you hear a drill going, and it doesn't exactly inspire confidence if you hear someone roaring and screaming inside in the dental room itself, for example. Not that goes on, but by way of example. Nevertheless, having those kind of facilities in place. Just close down those. Empathy, much talked about, and how would I describe this? Absolutely critical, and having a thorough understanding of what empathy is in business. One process that I do this with another cohort of students, and one of the key areas is empathy. When I'm talking about leadership, when I'm talking about product innovation and service innovation and so on, this word keeps coming up. Now here it says caring individualized attention the firm provides its customers. Not that simple. Empathy is getting into their shoes for all intents and purposes. There is a brilliant model or technique that's been around for a number of years. I'm not going to show it to you. I'll tell you about it. If you want material on it, I'll give it to you. But it's called design thinking. And the whole premise of design thinking is that you get out and you try and live the experience of your customer. You try to experience what they're going through to get a deeper understanding. Then you go back in and you start developing your product and your services and coming up with prototypes, because now you've gone through this empathy phase. You've been in their shoes, as so many people who would have said, until you've walked in my shoes, how can you say you understand? And you can't. You really have to. And design thinking methodology, there are several other variants of that. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the business model canvas. Nearly every company is using this now in the last number of years. Enterprise Ireland are flogging it out the door for the last 6-7 years at least. It's been around since around 2007, 2008, give or take, the first versions of it. So it's all over the place. Everyone has jumped onto it and so on. And in there, in any of the material about business model canvas, they tell you, get out of the building. You would have heard me saying, if you want to understand another market, go there. Don't try and research it from your desk here in Ireland. Go to that physical country, spend time in there. You might have a local agent and all that, but you need to get on a plane and get out there. Well, at the risk of what, €2,000 now next week or so on and so forth, whatever the case may be. Essential business it is. But get out there, get to know your customers, get to know your market and so on. Same for the business model canvas. Get out of the building, go and talk to your customers. You can do so much of this bench work in your office, but the real knowledge is out there with your customers. And this is where this whole concept of empathy becomes extremely important. Get out and feel what others are experiences. That's how you get to know the pain and the gain, what excites customers, all this sort of stuff is only when you've gone out and experienced it, then bring it back in. And you can actually melt this into what we call learning organizations. How efficiently you can communicate what you've experienced in the customer's shoes back to your internal organization, such that they have a clear understanding and can then design, develop, and build the products and services that meets precisely those needs. You might say, does it take time? Not necessarily. This isn't a huge exercise, but it just means doing things slightly different. So have a look at that model. As I said, if any of you want that, I have I have some material on it. It's called design thinking, but the whole premise is built around empathy and understanding customers. Not even going to read all those. It's too small for me even on the screen. And but it just talks about those descriptions there. Empathy, quality, and so on. Companies should not be expected to give customers individual attention. Reverse code it. Essentially, you need to give them individual attention. You need to treat as many or groups of them as closely as possible. So there's a kind of a subset of what you can and can't do in that descriptor. So again, just to recap on these, the service quality gaps, expected service and perceived service, and external communication to customers, all this area outside, getting to know it, that's where physically going out, going through the empathy process to get to understand and get more insights into what your customers. Now, your customers could be the wholesalers down the road. They could be a particular subset or group of retailers in your supply chain. In any case, when you hand over to somebody else, Ishikawa, he's a great man for his quality and the cause and effect diagrams, fishbone diagrams, or whatever to call it. One of his better teachings was inside in a company. Treat your next employee in the process, or the next person in the process after you, as a customer. Back in the day, he used the concept of the photocopier. And now I don't know if some of you would remember going back back then, but when you went to a photocopier, you had to set the number of pages, as you still do today, and the type of paper and the number and so on and so forth. And you ran your put in your original, off you went, 200 copies of A3 diagrams, and off you went. And then somebody else comes along and they needed another 200 of A4 size, and they put in their thing and bang, 200 copies. And what happens? It starts printing A3 size, and they're pressing buttons to try and stop the bloody thing from printing on all these A3 because they want A4 size. His premise was, reset the machine to the default. Now, of course, technology is caught up and the thing times out and resets itself today anyway. But it was a very simple and effective example of how you would treat the next person as a customer, have the place right for them. If no, I was going to mention the kitchen and cooking and things like that. Not even going to go there. In any case, where this also fits in is into
Men cook too, Mark. You know that.
Sorry.
Men cook too. I hope you know.
I believe so. It's there are some things in life I just can't get my head around, and that's one of them. But you might have come across TQM. Okay, again, a very misused concept. TQM is a philosophy. It's a state of mind in organizations. It's not a methodology. All the other stuff are methodologies, processes, and so on and so forth that support a TQM mindset in an organization. And this is essentially what we're trying to look at here as well. If you want to put a more recognizable brand or name or concept onto empathy and all of this sort of stuff, is TQM, treating customers and having a quality approach to how we do all of this stuff. And trust me, I was never a proponent of quality. At one point in my career, I genuinely dived straight in until the RTFM hit me literally between the two eyes once, to take time out and do things a little bit slower. And then over time, I got a lot faster because I was following more processed. And now that was back in the mid to late 80s and so on. In any case, this whole concept of total quality and TQM, remember, it's a philosophy, a mindset, and that's where an organization should strive. Now, later on, that's the desired service and the minimum level of customers. So what's the tolerance level so if I go back to my example there, when they were talking about in that one very rare, as I said, it's the only one I can think of, rare occasion that Dell kind of got a little bit wrong. The desired service was 2 weeks, let's assume that. Midways through the second week or towards the beginning of the second week, we were getting emails to say, due to heavy demand and blah, 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 our product, your product is going to be at least another week. They didn't say at least. I mean, that would set the hair standing on the back of your neck. Your product will be another 7 to 9 working days, so on. So they were managing this tolerance level, in other words, the adequate level of service before we as customers became totally annoyed and said, yeah, but keep it, give me a refund and so on. So how you can manage that. So knowing and getting an insight as to what the minimum level of customers are willing to accept. And that's only your starting point, getting to understand the minimum level and then move from there and try and always get to beyond the desired. That should be goal setting within an organization. Don't, in other words, don't aim for the bottom or race to the bottom, to use the expression, move to the top. So we can assess service quality from a customer's perspective, absolutely. Track customers' expectations and perceptions over time and any discrepancies between them. Okay, and that's the key to it, trying to predict behaviors, performances based on the data we're collecting about expectations and perceptions, because they can change, literally can change, like with the weather. Competition can affect people's perceptions, because if they can have it this that way, why can't we have it this way, and so on. And not understanding the whole process behind what you're delivering to the customer themselves. So that can cause competition, and competition will provoke perceptions from your customers to increase demands and so on and so forth. So it's a mind game. It's a battle in terms of how we hold on to and win customers. So we can compare a set of ServQual scores against those of competitors, which I was just talking about, or best practice examples. So best in, what's the expression? Best in class. Personally, I hate that crap. We're the best in class for this. Yeah, show me the numbers. How big is the class? It's like the ads on TV, 78% of people prefer this particular shampoo. And you go and you read the fine print on the screen, 127 people were surveyed. Hardly a representative sample of the population by any stretch of the imagination, but nevertheless, the headlines are out there. It's enough to create, this is interesting, blah, blah, blah. And lastly, because we'll be taking a quicker break than we did last week, or the week before last, we can compare the expectations and perceptions of different customer groups. And this is the whole point of saying, segment your customers and fine tune and continuously fine tune. Just because you've done a segmentation and these particular customers there, those there, this and so on, that's not enough, because excuse me. Beg your pardon. It's a constantly evolving environment. As I said, for example, you're going to have pressures from competitors, customers changing their minds, perceptions change, word of mouth. So these are constantly evolving or moving targets that you need to be in tune with all the time, and you need to be getting the data in. So if you only measure once a year, you mightn't have those customers within 6 months and so on. So you need to be constantly out there getting feedback and fine tune. That's why we have all these Six Sigma things in place. That's why we have all this Kaizen, continuous improvement, and so on, so on, so on. There's a whole battery of these initiatives running through organizations to get deeper insight, understanding of what's happening out there with our customers, such that we can at least stay in business and supply and make profit and so on. So we can assess the expectations and perceptions of internal customers, e.g. departments or services we deal with. That's easily done. Obviously, it's out externally is where the real fun begins, and getting that information. And of course, it comes at a cost. And how then you want to perhaps use technology to mitigate or reduce any serious investment in. I mean, you're not going to send out an army of people to carry out surveys every 2 weeks. It'll be impractical, but obviously. But what other ways can you, there's a whole battery of mechanisms. Give us a feedback, we'll give you a reduction on your next purchase and all this sort of stuff. So ways of getting, give us a 5 stars, give us this, give us that. Feedback is welcome, blah blah blah. And in 1 or 2 instances, I get pestered with some emails. Would you like to rate us now? Would you like to rate us now? And all this sort of stuff. It can be a bit annoying, and that can cause angst amongst customers if you overdo it as well. So again, putting the right mechanisms and the right data. That's why I talked about it last Saturday in terms of the metrics, the data and information, knowing what to measure, how to measure it, how frequently or not to measure it, and so on, that it generates valuable information for you to be able to meet the needs of the customers, for example. Get out of that, Mark, and get up there, and yeah. Anyway, folks, I'm going to call it a night.